Welcome to Gardener's World. This is a support for the cardoons. Cardoon foliage is now really beginning to grow, but it's the flowers and the stems that need the support. They will go right up here, great artichoke heads on these long stems, and the summer goes by and they start to flop. And if we have some bad weather, they do get bashed. And this year I've created this sort of semi-permanent structure. We've got them on all the cardoons here in the dual garden. The crucial thing with this, as with anything that you support in your borders, is to do it before it needs it. It's preventative, not to recover a bad situation. So you can use wood, you can use metal, you can use whatever you like, but gently start supporting plants now, and that will avoid trouble. And they very quickly disappear. You won't see any of these supports in a month or two. On today's programme, JJ Chalmers shows us around his family garden in Scotland. This is a cherry blossom that we planted 3 years ago when my son was born. I grew up in a really green-fingered family where we gardened, there was always a task, a chore, and I kind of relished those things. We meet a gardener preserving a cherished collection of pelargoniums.
The key tip would have to be to care, which means look after them. Treat them nicely, don't pay them back.
Toby discovers the joys of heritage daffodils at Coat Hill in Cornwall. These aren't ordinary daffodils, no, they're heritage varieties or antique daffs. Daffodils that have stood the test of time. And I shall be having a rethink of my dry garden and making something that's good even better. Months, we widened this half of the flanking orchard beds, and we've been around the garden and collected up all the foxgloves that are self-seeded in places where fundamentally we don't want them. We've dug them up and transplanted them. When they flower in June, those foxgloves should again create a rhythm, but this time of purples and pinks and the spires of flower. So now, the next phase I want to go to is at ground level. I've also been around the garden collecting hardy geraniums, which are brilliant for getting low-level foliage and colour. Now I have to confess that I can't remember what varieties these are. They come from various places around the garden, and these are plants, some of them, which we've had for decades. The beauty of hardy geraniums, of all kinds, is that they are tough. They're tough and pretty. And being tough and pretty in a plant is a great virtue. So we'll pop these down. I'm just going to start pretty much at random, and they will grow in any kind of shape. You have geranium fire, for example, which will be very happy in almost dark, dry shade. Now is a really good time to lift and divide hardy geraniums, and they're very easy to do. They're a shallow-rooted plant, and you can break them right down, or you can dig up a big clump. And I've got one here. This is a geranium macrorhizum, Bevan's variety. So I just gently tease that out, you can see. A strong basic stem and then these roots coming off it. And that will transplant perfectly well, as will that sort of size. Now, if you want to create lots of new plants from hardy geraniums, buy the biggest you can afford. Break it up into the smallest units possible, pot up each piece, and in about 2 or 3 months' time you can plant them out as individual plants, and in a year or two you'll be breaking up those clumps that they've created. Right, I am now going to take this en masse, tease it out the ground, there we go, and try I want to put this cup in the corner, Nelly. Like that. Do you? Good girl. Right, let's move that out of the way and create a planting hole. And planting them is really easy because they're so shallow. So I just with my fingers need to scoop a little bit of the depression out, pop this in there. And the point about this is it will spread. So the initial clump will very quickly act as both ground cover and as really good decoration. Now, I will water that in, and at this time of year, if you move anything, give it a soak. That will now be fine. I don't need to keep watering. Now, a few weeks ago, we went to Scotland to visit J.J. Chalmers. For the last 6 years, I've lived here in Fife with my wife, Cornelia, our children, Hayley, who's 5, and James, who's 3. Our garden has been a work in progress. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm passionate about being outside, making the most of the space we have, and most importantly, sharing the joy of gardening with my family. Where did you learn about the secret passage? In 2011, when I was a Royal Marine, I was seriously injured in Afghanistan. Being outside in nature and spending time in the garden became a huge part of my recovery. There's so many benefits to gardening. I mean, there's physical benefits to start with. I mean, a lot of my rehab was essentially done by, having a responsibility for a place and having to overcome whatever challenges I met to ensure that this place thrived. It's a mature garden with 3 different areas. It was pretty overgrown when we first arrived, so the first thing we had to figure out was what we had and what we wanted to keep. It's been a challenge. This space is absolutely dominated by this stunning monkey puzzle tree. It is beautiful, but it does cause a few problems. The pigeons love to roost in it, so this area is covered with bird poop, but it's also very shady. We took out some rhododendrons that had just got a bit out of hand, and again, were really blocking out the light. We want it to be a bit more airy and open. We like to plant wildflowers in the summer. We've got daffodils in the spring, things that will encourage wildlife, bugs, nature. When I was going through our recovery, everything was about me. It was almost selfish. Everybody cared for me. So the opportunity to care for something else was really important. And I do feel like, with this garden in particular, that I'm a custodian of. This has been here for a lot longer than I've been, and it'll be here way beyond that, me being here as well. I like to think of the garden as a bit of a movable feast, where plants can be juggled about, depending on where they work best. We actually planted potatoes into this bed after rooting everything else out, and that helped aerate the soil and regenerate it so we could then begin planting. Now we're beginning to see what may stay and what may go. This camellia is starting to come through really nicely, and this is definitely not going anywhere. This is a cherry blossom that we planted 3 years ago when my son was born. But the things that don't work in here, they're not going to go to waste. We'll dig them up and we'll probably move them down to the bottom of the garden. I don't just repurpose plants. One of my passions is building things too. If I can reuse any item for the garden, I will. I want to make myself a little DIY sieve because my compost is ready for use, but there's some large bulky material in it that I'd like to get out of it. So instead of using the one from my kitchen, I'm going to build myself one. And it's really simple. It's just a wooden frame which I'm making out of some old repurposed material. I mean, this is literally just some old bed slats out of a single bed and then some chicken wire. Drill 4 pilot holes in the ends, butt the 4 pieces of wood together, and drive a screw into each corner to fix it. Right, that's the frame. And you can make this as big or as small as you like. I've made this the right size so it'll sit right on top of my wheelbarrow, and I can shovel in my compost, give it a little shake, and then off and use it. Right, chicken wire now. Bit of a hack for people like me because, well, I've got a disability, which means that I've got very little strength in my hand. A lot of staple guns require a lot of strength in order to fire them. This one is battery powered, so it just needs a little fire in order to fire in the staple. I'm stapling it a hand's distance apart to prevent it from breaking when the weight of the compost sits in the chicken wire. Well, I'm ready to use that, and I know someone that's desperate to get digging in the compost heap. Carry a shovel. Both hands. 2 hands, that's it. Time to put the sieve to the test with my little helper, James. Now, can you scoop some into the big sieve? You got it? I grew up in a really green-fingered family where we gardened. There was always a job that needed done. There was always a task, a chore, and I kind of relished those things. Your garden gives you a greater understanding of the world outside of it as well. You know, a respect for nature, for wildlife, for plant life, and that really does start at home. Where are we going? To the back. Some of this compost is destined for the raised beds built round the back. So we like to grow things like carrots and radishes in here. We've been doing it for about 3 or 4 years, and each season we just like to put in a little bit of fresh composted material just to make sure there's a nice bit of nutrients in it. I inherited my love of gardening from my mum, Liz. And as she lives just up the road, me and the kids love popping by to use the greenhouse to grow on our veg.
Now these are called shallots.
Haley, which way did they go? A bit out, yeah?
And what's this in the bottom?
Then, when our onions and shallots are ready, I'll bring them back and put them in our raised beds. At the very least, I want my kids to be outside when they can be, but at the same time, I really want them to love it. I want them to feel like they won't get their hands dirty and get stuck into things. Good job. Hi, 3. It's always lovely to see children being enthusiastic and engaging in the garden. And I think one of the things we all learnt during lockdown, not just for children, for all of us, is that your garden, however big, however small, is full of the glories of nature. Now, I've got a tray of chilies here. This is Decair. It's medium hot, grows well, good size, but at this stage, they need pricking out. Now, when you're pricking out, the true leaves are the small ones. These bottom ones are the seed leaves, and then the top ones are the ones that tell us it's got roots. So we hold it by the leaf, never by the stem, because the stem is quite fragile, and then get under it. And what I'm trying to do is take out as much root as possible. So I'm not pulling at all, I'm just levering it out. There we go. And then we just gently make room for it. I'm using a potting compost that's got good drainage, and gently press it down. As long as it can stand up, that's absolutely fine. And when we water it, it'll move the compost around the roots and firm it in. And then just gradually do this to all of them. And actually, I love this job. It's meditative. It takes concentration, but it's not tricky. Okay, let's visit the first of your gardens this week. And it belongs to Julie Lloyd.
Hi, I'm Julie. Welcome to our garden in Hertfordshire. We have 2 small gardens. This is the front garden. When we moved in, it was full of bark chip and children's play equipment. The first thing we did was to put in the pond. The back garden, which was a low-maintenance gravel garden when we moved in, is quite challenging because over on the right-hand side there are some very tall trees which make it quite shady and quite dry. As you can probably tell, I'm a fan of a fairly loose, informal style of gardening, and I quite like to let the plants feed themselves about, and then I edit them as necessary. We've got 4 water butts in the garden, and I found that if you turn the lids of the water butts upside down, then they make ideal bird baths. They're visited from everything from wrens to robins to blackbirds to wood pigeons. Various types of dianthus seem to do quite well in the soil conditions that I have in the garden. Dotted around I have red pelargoniums, such as this one. These plants are cuttings of cuttings of cuttings over 30 years of those original plants in my granddad's garden. I'm really proud and happy to have them in mine. There's a connection back through the generations. I'm a bit of a plantaholic, and I definitely try and squeeze as many plants as I possibly can into a small space. If something stressful happens, I could just pop out into the garden and do a bit of deadheading. It works wonders.
Thank you very much, Judy. And thank you for sharing your garden. It's lovely. Now, as part of the process of building up my stock for the orchard beds, I'm growing quite a lot from seed. Now, you'll find that plants are getting much more expensive, and we're finding that we've got less and less money to spend. So growing plants from seed makes really good sense from a financial point of view. It's much cheaper. So, for that border, this year I'm going to grow a lot of annuals for year 1. They will give me the colour and the volume that I want. But at the same time, I'm going to grow some perennials from seed too. Now these will work much more slowly. Some perennials might start to flower the first year, but most will take a year or 2 to develop. And obviously the perennial, that could live for years and years. But annuals can fill a border up while those perennials are developing. So the first one is Nicotiana, which is a tobacco plant, lime green. It's a tender annual, so it's not frost hardy, but it will grow in light shade and of course has the most wonderful evening fragrance. Use a peat-free compost. Let's fill that up. The seeds are tiny. So if you look here, you can see they're very small. And what you try to do, as always with seed sowing, is sow them evenly and thinly. So you just kind of sprinkle those over, like that. And then gently press them into the compost. Now, these seeds are very fine indeed. So if I water them from the top, you can spread these very fine seeds to the edge of the seed tray. Initially, until you start to see germination, it's a good idea to water them from below. And that means putting them in some kind of container. It could be a sink if it's big enough, it could be a deep tray. Anything that will take about an inch of water, wait till the water has been absorbed, and that will give them moisture enough to promote germination. Obviously I need to do a label. Lime green. Put them somewhere warm. The greenhouse is ideal on a windowsill. And then these will germinate in about 10 to 14 days and be ready to plant out at the end of May, beginning of June. But when you have a perennial, and I've got here a foxglove. It's a perennial foxglove, Digitalis parviflora, which is sown now, might take a year or 2 to get established, but will go on flowering for years to come. Like the Nicotiana seeds, I won't cover these as they need light to germinate, and I'll also water these from below. And these will go in the greenhouse to germinate. And over the coming weeks, I shall be sowing a wide range of plants for those orchard beds. Perennials, biennials, hardy annuals, and tender annuals. And by midsummer, I think it'll be looking pretty good. But there are gardeners who focus their passion, their skill, and their love for a particular group of plants. And that's certainly the case for Stella Abrahams in her garden in Hertfordshire.
My
collection of pelargoniums brings so much joy into my life. Every day they're different. Every day something else is coming into flower. They're just a little ray of sunshine every day. I'm addicted to pelargoniums. I've got 675 plants. I can't resist them, actually. This collection was started by my father, my late father, because he was a botanist. So he was intrigued by plants generally, and the idea that there were many, many different varieties was something that he also found very interesting. It became my job to tend to them, so I'd do the deadheading and I'd do the watering, and I learned these things from about the age of 7. And I remember buying him a birthday present one year in a collection of 6. I've still got those 6 plants that we carried on. There's one called Deacon Romance. That was my favourite of them. It's lovely to have such a living legacy from my dad, who passed away in 2009. He asked me to look after his collection for him, and so the greenhouse had to be built here to house them. A lot of people are familiar now with the scented leaf varieties. This one is called Joy Lucille. It's a very pretty flower, but the most beautiful lemon rose scent, which you can use in cooking. This plant will actually be a cutting of my dad's original Joy Lucille, so I've kept that going as well for over 50 years from his original plant. This is called Prince of Orange. This has got a delicious orange scent, very, very strong, and the best way to get it is to just rub the leaf a little bit, and then perfume just comes through. So you can see that this plant has really quite thin, tender stems, which makes it quite difficult to take cuttings because they are less moisture intensive than the thicker stemmed, more conventional, people would call a geranium as opposed to a pelargonium. I'll show you an example here. You can see that this plant, which is called Gemma, the stem on it is much, much thicker. My dad used to call all of these plants geraniums. In fact, I think they were much more commonly known as geraniums. And there's a lot of confusion about this. The simple answer is all these plants are in the same plant family as the wild cranesbills and the cultivated hardy geraniums. Those hardy geraniums are perennial plants. They do survive outside in the winter. These plants cannot survive outside in the winter. They are tender and they have to be brought into a frost-free environment. So the correct name for the hardy geranium is geranium, and the correct name for these is pelargonium. So here are some lovely examples of ivy leaf geraniums showing off their trailing habit. And they really are the most remarkably productive when it comes to flowering. I've repurposed curtain rails, anything I can, to hang through the gables in order to find more hanging space. They have the most wonderful colourways, from this beautiful dark colour, this is Tommy, through to Rose Enchantress, which is one of Dad's originals. This one is Fairly. It has a single flower that will probably keep going all the way through until the autumn. That's well worth collecting as a beginner because they are extremely easy to take cuttings of. You can probably root a cutting of that in about 10 days and you got yourself another plant for free. Most of the plants I've got cuttings of. First of all, because they're an insurance policy. Secondly, because you want to be able to replace plants with cuttings to keep the vigour going. A lot of these plants will be new cuttings this year. I'm going to show you how to take a cutting of a pelargonium. This is a regal type pelargonium called Lord Bute. I'm looking on this plant for a non-flowering shoot in order to take a cutting. So I'm going to take my cutting just below a leaf joint. That's where the leaves meet the stem. And I'm going to cut it clean. I'm then going to remove most of the leaves because the plant has now got to survive without roots. I'm then finally going to make another cut exactly on the leaf joint. I've experimented with a peat-free multi-purpose compost, vermiculite and perlite, which have both drainage and aeration, and also some sharp sand. And I'm very pleased about the results I've been getting. Push the cutting in, firm the soil around it, and give it a little twist just to make sure there aren't any air pockets around it. And then I'm going to give it a drink. And then finally, a label. Got its name on it, Lord Butte. And there we are. A key care tip would have to be to care, which means look after them, water them, deadhead them for the appearance sake, and also because it promotes more flowers. Treat them nicely, they'll pay you back. Their whole demeanour changes when they've had a decent drink, and the decent drink is never soggy. During the growing season, so any time from March onwards, it's advisable to feed. If you want lots of flowers, you have to go with a high potassium food. Something like tomato food is good. I am proud of this collection because it's something of a privilege to look after them. They are special to me, and I think if my dad saw this, he would have been very proud indeed and pretty chuffed. He would have really made him smile, I know.
I love Stella's little tip about giving your cutting a twist. I've not done that before, but I will from now on. Now, we store quite a few of our pelargoniums here in this wooden greenhouse. We store some others down the bottom too. But the wooden greenhouse has become, over the winter months, a cross between a storage unit and a conservatory, because all the plants in here, succulents, salvias, agapanthus, we've got the carnivorous plants, fuchsias, pelargoniums, are more or less tender, which means that they will not reliably survive a long meadow winter. But at this point, in spring, on a lovely day, you feel they ought to be outside. We ought to be able to put these in the garden and enjoy them, but I would say hold on. Don't be in too much of a rush, because we can still have frost. Certainly here we can. Give it another week or two, and then gradually hone them off. And then when we get into May, the last risk of frost should have passed, and then they can go out and you get the greenhouse back. Now, still to come on today's programme. We meet a couple in Birmingham whose garden was inspired by a triangle.
Here in the dome, in the cactus house, this is where the triangular theme of the garden really becomes its most intense. You know, we're inside a curved form made of triangles.
And Toby travels to Cornwall to celebrate daffodils in all their glory. 5 minutes in the autumn planting the bulbs can give you 5 months of colour. That's 5 minutes well spent. This is the dry garden, and it is the other great project for this year. The dry garden is called that because it's the one bit of the garden that drains reliably well, which means that we can have in here plants that we can't really grow elsewhere in the garden. Essentially, these are Mediterranean plants, and some of them do really well, like the euphorbia. We have Euphorbia caracias wolfenii, which is doing really well in here. And for days at a time, sometimes weeks, it looks really good, and I'm very happy with it. But it is only days and a few weeks. So what I want to do is take all the good elements of the dry garden and make them better. So, the first thing I have to do is unpick it all so I can put it back together again. Now, in practical terms, that that means to start to dig up the plant. So I'm going to take out everything that can be removed without damaging it, plus everything I know I don't want in here, plus at the same time weeds. This is a Stipa gigantea, much too big. That definitely will come out. Stipas are one of those grasses that really do need good drainage and lots of sunlight. Right, this is come out. Stipa gigantea. Right, now I've cleared the great big clump of the Stipa. I can see this iris, which was completely hidden. We can take that out, and you can see with a bearded iris like that, that's the rhizome, these are the roots. Now all the goodness for the flower is in that rhizome. So I think in the short term I can just pop it in the tray, I'll pack some soil around it, and that will be good for a few days. Whilst not every plant will be happy in a crate, almost everything will be perfectly happy if you just put it up using either a peat-free basic compost or even recycled compost or the earth it came in. As long as the roots are protected for the few days or weeks that they're going to be put to one side where you clean and prepare your bed, they will be perfectly okay. Right, I will continue not just for today, but for days to come. But now we're off to visit the garden of Adrienne and Gavin Wade in Birmingham, who found the inspiration for their garden from one particular geometric shape.
To me, the garden is everything.
The garden, it's really integral to how we live and how we think and how we breathe. It's a really special thing for us. The garden is an artwork. It contains artworks. There's a curated set of elements. They're things for us to be in and experience and watch and love.
Triangle garden is 9 metres wide by 55 metres long. So we've broken it up into 5 sections, and the first being the patio, and the next area is the lawn, and it's got the triangle beds and the exotic planting, and then there's the fernery, and then further along there is the bromeliad house. And you walk down and you see the geodesic dome.
We started the garden out of lots of different starting points, but one of the key elements was the geodesic dome that I was really interested in as a very perfect natural form, as a structure that is partly about rethinking how you put things together, how you make something like a garden. Here in the dome, in the cactus house, this is where the triangular theme of the garden really becomes its most intense. We're inside a curved form made of triangles.
We've got a variety of different plants, from euphorbias that have come from Africa and cacti from the Americas. And the euphorbia is really interesting because it's adapted itself to have spines instead of leaves in the same way as cacti do, because the climate is similar but they're on different continents, and that to me is really fascinating.
We love the spiky plants. We love the things that look so exotic and alien. When they flower, it's an event, and we come out at night sometime because that's only going to flower one night. It's exciting.
Yeah, they're fascinating plants.
Yeah.
I like to put different leaf shapes and textures together in the garden because I don't want it to look all samey. I like a tall grass next to a ginger that has more tropical leaf shape. So visually you've got something different to look at all the time, so you're not just looking at the same thing. Usually garden designers say you have to have something low at the front of the border and stagger it so it's higher at the back, but I like tall plants at the front and I like see-through plants. It's just all a big experiment for me. In this garden, one of the advantages of doing beds in the lawn is we've been able to change the soil types so we can grow different types of plants. So in this bed, we've changed it to a free draining soil to allow us to plant the palms and the succulents and arid plants. And in another bed, we've left it with our heavy clay soil, and those plants don't mind that at all. My favourite group of plants are epiphytes, and I've got a collection of bromeliads. I grow neoregelias, and they have flowers low in their cups, and there's also bilbergias, and they have drooping flowers that hang down. This is my patio, where it houses my Tillandsia collection and some succulents, so if you had a small space, this is how you could use it. I had a branch from a neighbour's tree fall down, and I thought that's perfect to display the Tillandsias. They're air plants, so they don't have roots, and they just sit on the tree as they would in nature, and they get all their nutrients from the air and the rain. I really love these plants because they're so easy to care for. You just, if they're curling like this, they're showing you signs they need a bit of water. So when you see that, give them a spritz. And these stay out all summer long. And as soon as it starts to get below 10 degrees, I take them inside and they live in my bathroom, which is nice and hot and steamy for them. And this is Tillandsia usneoides, otherwise known as Spanish moss. Hangs down from trees in the American South, you've probably seen it there. And this Tillandsia bergeri is quite hardy, and you could probably leave that outside if you lived in London or somewhere by the coast, but here it has to get tucked up and protected. This is one of my favourite places in the garden. We call it the fernery. It started with 2 apple trees and the Roostafina that gave us dappled shade, so we thought what type of plants would be good in here, and ferns would be perfect. So we started with the tree ferns and then added the underplanting like this Cyathea cooperi and Dicksonia squarosa. They have to come in the winter because they're not hardy in our British climate. We also have other shade-loving plants like the gunnera and even some gingers to add a bit of colour.
Having a garden is very special, and you can escape into it, so we've both thought about it as an escape, a kind of utopia. Of course, every utopia isn't perfect, has its flaws, and it is hard work, but that's really enjoyable.
I feel privileged to have this garden. We live in the city, it's really busy and noisy, and you can come out into the garden and just enjoy it and just take a breath. We are very lucky to have it.
I don't suppose you could come up with a garden that's more different to Longmeadow than that. But I like that. I like the way that gardens can be and should be a reflection of your personality. Because this means that there is a garden for everybody. I absolutely love these wooden enemies, which at this time of year in the spring sunshine are opening out and have slowly spread through the cups. But slow is the word, because they spread by seed almost inches at a time every year. We first planted a little clump maybe 26 years ago, and this is what they've reached so far. But don't be put off by that, because if you plant a few around the base of a tree, it won't be long before they make a lovely little white spring coronet. And for a few weeks, they're an absolute joy. Now it's time to go and visit another of your gardens. And this takes us to Ireland.
Hi, my name is Aoife, and welcome to my garden here in North Leitrim. I first began to develop an interest in gardening when I was 11, and since then my collection of plants has grown from a small clump of wild daffodils in the corner of my grandmother's property to over 390 different individual plants. The main soil type here in North Leitrim is clay. In summer, it can be baked incredibly hard and dry. Plus in winter, it can become waterlogged and soggy, and nutrients are easily leached from the soil. Compost and organic matter was added to other areas of the garden to improve its structure and fertility, but you'd be surprised by the amount of plants that learn to adapt to grow in clay soils. The vegetable garden was a 16th birthday present from my parents, and some of the first crops I planted in it was radishes and onions. But this year they ended up coming under attack from vine weevil. But hopefully after treating the soil and letting it sit fallow for a while, I will be able to plant out more brassicas into it. Gardening has really become an obsession for me, and I hope to one day work or volunteer somewhere that will put all the knowledge I've learned over the years to use. When it comes to gardening, my greatest inspiration has definitely been my grandmother. We both have a shared love and passion for gardening, and I really want to say thank you to her for everything she's taught me over the years, and for being someone who really understands the amount of time and effort that goes into creating and maintaining a beautiful garden.
What an inspired present to give Aoife a raised bed for her 16th birthday, but clearly what you have there is the makings of a great gardener. And raised beds are really good for growing vegetables. With a raised bed, you get better drainage, a better soil structure, and for us, the crucial difference is they warm up much quicker. And when soil gets warmer, it means that seeds germinate much easier, and also young seedlings will grow quicker. Now, what I'm growing in this one is going to be carrots. And when you're growing carrots, they do need a really finely prepared soil. So break it down and get a nice tilth. Any chance to use that word is to be celebrated. Right, I've got two halves of the raised bed because I'm going to grow two different varieties. We've got a Chantenay carrot. This is a Chantenay red cord. It will germinate when the soil is a bit cooler and give you an earlier crop. And most of these will be ready to harvest in June. You can see that carrot seed is quite small, but the important thing is to give it a chance to grow, to give it space. So when we're broadcasting, you literally just sprinkle. There you go now. Many thinks this could just be biscuits. It's not. It's carrot seed. Now the crucial thing about broadcasting as opposed to sowing them in rows is that you don't thin them, you leave them. That means that there's much less risk of carrot fly. Carrot fly are the great pest of carrots. They zoom in on it, lay their eggs, and then the larvae hatch and feed off the roots. And they hunt by smell. And when you thin carrots in a row, you release that lovely carroty aroma into the air, and you're attracting every carrot fly in the neighbourhood. On this side, I'm going to show some knot carrots. Now, knot carrots are particularly sweet, and they're a good early crop. If you very cold, they won't germinate. However, you can help by crushing them. And I've got these crushes, and they'll do two things. One, they will just help keep the warmth in a little bit, and also they will keep the moisture in. Of course, you don't need a raised bed or an open bed. You can grow carrots in a container. However, it is important when you're sowing carrots in a container to give them deep enough room for them to grow, because some carrots are quite big. Well, the carrot season is just beginning, but there are quite a few spring flowers that are now either over or coming to an end. And you might think daffodils are one of them now that we're in April, but it isn't the case. And Toby has been down to Cuthill in Cornwall, where they have a huge range of heritage daffodils that flower from early in the year until late into spring.
Some gardeners I know, they like to grow their daffodils in distinct clumps, variety by variety, often with the label out the front, like a row of usual suspects. But not me, I'm from the West Country and I like this. A floral jambalaya of different varieties all mixed together. And this corner of Cornwall is famous for it. You see, there are daffodils in the hedgerows, daffodils gone wild in the meadows and under the canopy of the orchards. It only looks beautiful. The daffodils have made themselves at home here and naturalised. And they look so natural. These aren't ordinary daffodils, no. They're heritage varieties or antique daffs. Daffodils that have stood the test of time. Cuthill House is home to more than 250 varieties. Since 1947, the National Trust has painstakingly rescued and revived hundreds of daffodils from the surrounding landscape, many dating back to the 17th century. Keeping their collection thriving is head gardener Dave Bouch. So why are there so many heritage daffodils here?
Well, good question, Toby. I think if you wind back the clock a little bit, the Tamar Valley's been historically really important for commercial horticulture. So back at the turn of the last century, there were over 10,000 people employed in horticulture involved in daffodils. So it would have been a real thriving industry.
So the Tamar Valley and its slopes are really good for growing early daffodils.
It was really important to get the flowers to market before anybody else. And those south-facing slopes and high rainfall and wonderful sunshine all creates that early crop.
Why did it stop?
Because I think there was a big factor around the Second World War, so obviously it was really important for commercial growers not to be growing flowers but focusing on fruit and vegetables. So the daffodil bulbs were lifted and put into the hedgerows. I think the plan was that the war wouldn't have lasted very long. The guys could have then come back onto the ground, lifted the bulbs out of the hedgerows and carried on growing as normal. But unfortunately that's not the story.
Well, I love the fact that the hedgerows became like an ark for all these wonderful old variety.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The thing I noticed, there's daffodils that are over here, and then there are plenty still in bud.
So I think from the collection we've got here, we've got a group called Rhinesfeld Early Sensation, and they flowered just before Christmas. So sort of mid-December-ish, they're starting to pop up, and certainly by Christmas they're in full flower. And then we've got one of my favourite varieties that won't flower through until sort of middle of May.
Oh, what's that?
The Tamar Double White, and that was an amazing plant that really strongly scented and was used in churches to decorate churches over Whitsun. So such a long flowering period.
Most people think of daffodils taking centre stage in March and April, but we can see from these heritage varieties that you could have daffs right through from December to May. That's a whole 5 months.
This is butter and eggs.
Gosh, how old is this?
So this one's dating back to sort of 1700s.
And you know, I can see exactly why it's called butter and eggs. Just looks like you're halfway through making a cake.
It's amazing, isn't it?
That's terrific, isn't it? What a great name. Are there any other favourites?
There's a wonderful one that's called Fortune, and that name purely come about because of the money that was being made from it as a cut flower.
Oh, it's a bit like Moneymaker Tomato.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both Wordsworth and Shakespeare were inspired by wild daffodils, so this is a plant that's part of a natural heritage and to be treasured. Many of these vintage varieties have survived and flowered consistently for well over a century. The daffodil I've got a soft spot for are the beautifully by Devon's red soils. The way you grow daffodils here looks completely natural. It's as if, they're just self-sown around. But that's not entirely the case, is it?
So what we can do is lift that clump of bulbs and divide them and move them around.
Now, this is the interesting thing, because I get asked about this a lot. Got some daffodils, they're in the wrong place, I want to move them, but often the books would say wait till they go dormant.
Well, it is quite right. Really, the best time to move them is when they're dormant. But the problem with that is you don't know where they are or what they are. So now's the time so we can see exactly what they're doing and where we want them to move, so we can have a go at it.
Yes. Look at that, nice. Well, that's a good job, isn't it?
Yeah, look at those.
There's plenty there, isn't there? So what you want me to do here then, Dave, is rip them out into individuals, yeah?
Yeah.
And then plant them individually.
Yeah. So the flower will come off fairly quickly, but then the plant will survive and go on and flourish.
What an immensely satisfying job. Do you want me to stick them in individually, Dave? How far apart?
Yeah, so 6 or 8 inches apart.
Right, got it. So if I was lifting and dividing, making more of the daffodils I've got, what would be the ideal spot to put them in? What conditions do they really like?
So the great thing is they grow pretty much anywhere, but ideally you want good moist soil and some ample shade or full sun.
There's always a bit of a debate though, isn't there, about when you should chop your daffodils down, particularly if they're grown in grass.
What we do is we leave them for about 6 weeks after flowering. So that's the kind of time that we will start cutting.
And this is the other thing, you often hear this thing about deadheading, and I've been to gardens where the gardener likes the job of going around with a bamboo cane or a switch and then swashbuckling off all the flowers. Is that because they got anger issues, or is that is it completely unnecessary?
It is good practice to do it, but on some of our bigger meadows, there just isn't capacity, so they've just got to take their chances with that.
And I guess you get a few self-sown.
Yeah.
Do you get the odd new variety coming up there because of hybridisation?
Well, and of course, that's how you get the different varieties. So when you sow them from seed, you can collect the seed, and they take about 6 or 7 years to reach flowering time, but then that's the sort of time you look to see if you've created any new varieties.
Well, I'll be looking out for Dave Bouch daffodil. It's only a matter of time, Dave.
Well, hopefully one day.
Teal gardens can speak so well, and the daffodils, they're exceptional, each with a story to tell. But this is more than just a history lesson. What we can learn is that 5 minutes in the autumn planting the bulbs can give you 5 months of colour. And who knows, those flowers might come back for 5, 10, maybe 50 generations. That's 5 minutes well spent.
It seems to me to have been a particularly good daffodil year this year. Although you could argue that it's never bad one. But this has been especially good for me. And what I've got most pleasure from, I think, is not just the wild native daffodils, which are beautiful, and some of them are bigger, bolder ones, but the more delicate varieties. So some of them really tiny, but still jewel-like. Absolutely lovely. Now what I'm growing here is a first for me. I've got all training. I'm growing loofahs. Now, I remember as a child, in the bathroom, there'd be this long loofah, slightly sort of dodgy looking, a bit like a wrinkled stocking with the leg still in it. And you put 3 fingers in it, and you scratched your back, and the whole thing was a rather itchy, slightly odd experience. But loofahs are fun to grow. You can eat them, and you can scratch your back with them, so what's not to like? So I am going to grow loofahs, and I hope as many of you will embrace looferdom too and grow loofahs along with me, and I'll take you on the journey until harvest, and let's see who can grow the biggest and best loofah. The seeds look very like a sort of dark cucumber or melon seed. So I'm growing them in pots. What I will do is put 2 into each 3-inch pot, with the expectation that one of them won't germinate or will be weeded out. Just push them in like that on their edge. Now, these will need heat to germinate. We're talking about 25 degrees or more. So I'm going to put these in the greenhouse on a heated bench or a heated mat. But if you don't have a heated mat or even a greenhouse, then they will need to go on a windowsill above a radiator that's on. Water them, keep them well watered, and then when the nights are warm enough, which is going to be at least June, plant them out into the greenhouse. Now, I'm sure that all of you will now rush out and buy Luta seeds and grow them by the tens of thousands. But if, for any reason, you don't feel inclined to do that, here's some other jobs you can do this weekend. Daffodils grown in long grass can be left to die back naturally untouched. But if you're growing them in containers, it's a very good idea to deadhead them. This will mean that all the goodness as the foliage dies back goes into next year's bulb and therefore next year's display. Now that spring growth is really taking hold, it's important to feed plants grown in a container. General purpose liquid seaweed or homemade comfrey does the job very well. And it's much better to feed relatively lightly on a regular basis rather than to overload the plant at random. Sarracenias are wonderful carnivorous plants to grow either indoors or even outside in milder areas. But they can look a bit tatty by this time of year, so you should cut back right at the base any of the leaves that are showing signs of dying back. And this will very quickly be followed by a fresh flush of growth. The writing garden is always about getting that balance between white and green right. And I've often said that a white garden is a green garden with touches of white. But at this time of year, when you have the combination of the snowflakes and this lovely white daffodil failure, the white can really sing out without becoming overpowering, and that's partly because of the quality of the light. The spring, low, slanting light hits these delicate white flowers and really makes them dance above the green foliage. For a few days, it's just perfection. But that's it for today. I'll see you back here at Longmeadow at 8